Hola, hola a todos. My name is Sandra Milena. Welcome back to Vintage Mami. If you've been following our journey to move from the US to Sweden, this is part 3 of our series. So here we talk about life as a first-time mom in my 40s, married to a Swedish Viking and raising my gringo toddler. And today, I'm sharing what happened after we submitted our residence permit application and finally got our embassy appointment in Washington, D.C. To catch you up, after I filled out my application online, my husband had to fill out almost the same questions, and then we got confirmation that our application had been officially registered. Then, not too long after that, but a couple weeks later, he received an email from the Swedish embassy in Washington, D.C. with a day and time for our interview. We have to show our passport. I had to go and they have to see you in person. The embassy in Washington, D.C. was the one that we picked when we first did our application. I know that some people say that you can do it anywhere. Some people say that the only embassy they do it is in Washington, D.C. So I couldn't find a yes or no. But once we got our appointment date and time, it was very simple, but then life happens. The appointment was scheduled right on the same day that I had to be out of town for a business trip. I was like, OMG, of course, it had to be that day. So I panicked a little. My husband emailed the embassy in Swedish to sound a little bit better right away. And thankfully, they were super nice. They sent a new appointment for just a week later. The funny thing was that my business trip was in Virginia. So it was literally like 20-30 minutes from the embassy. But I couldn't escape from work and go there. I couldn't do it. So I had to schedule it. So I had to go back a week later to the Washington, D.C. area. But it was a huge relief that, it wasn't like 3 months later or a year later or something like that. It was just a week later. We got the new date and time. We made a one-day trip to Washington, D.C. And let me tell you, it was the journey, because traveling with a 3-year-old, it's a little bit drama. But then, we had car rental issues. When we got to the car rental, they're like, oh no, we don't have a car right now. You have to come back in like 5 hours. I'm like, we have to go to an interview, and we were like an hour and a half or 2 hours from the embassy, so we couldn't just take a train or a bus. But usual chaos, but we made it to Washington. If you've ever done a quick embassy trip, it's a lot of effort for something that takes like 15 minutes once you're there. So I don't know why they make you do all of that if you don't live in the state. We have kind of like a small embassy or an embassy branch or something like that in Fort Lauderdale. I think they moved to Boca recently, to Boca Raton. So I don't know why we couldn't go there if all they needed was a copy of our passport. But anyways, that's what we had to do. We had to go to DC for one day. When we finally got to the embassy, the interview was actually super short, like maybe 15 minutes. And they basically just went over the same questions that we had already answered in the application online. Things like how we met, where are we going to live if we get there, what are we going to do with our house here in Florida, and what does my husband do, what do I do, how are we going to support ourselves in Sweden. So nothing new or weird. I thought my husband or my son would have been able to join me in the interview, so we all dress up very nice. No, they couldn't go in with me. They just took a copy of my passport, and that was it. They told me to wait for a decision by email. It was done. I was like, I had brought so many documents just in case, like blood test or, anything that had to do with my child and that we were married. But none of that. They didn't ask for any of that. It was just a copy of my passport. And she was like, okay, that's it. I asked how long does it take for the decision to be made, and she said she didn't know. It could be a couple of weeks, or it could be a couple of months or longer. So she did not know. And that was our embassy day. It was short. It was a little stressful to plan and to be there for just one day, take a airplane in the morning and plan to come back in the afternoon, so we didn't have to spend money on hotels or anything like that. But overall, it went smooth. The waiting game is another thing now that we just have to wait. They didn't give us any answers. So I applied January 8th. The ball kind of started rolling in February when my husband received the second part of his application, and then the registration of the actual application. And we went to the interview March 19th. So it hasn't been that long, of a process. I don't feel like in a couple of months, things went along pretty quick. In the next video, I'll share how long it took to actually hear back from the migration, what the decision process looked like, and the moment we found out the results. So stay tuned and thumbs up, subscribe if you want to follow us. Of course, if you're applying for the Swedish resident permit or planning to move abroad anywhere, let me know. Let me know if you want me to go into more detail of exactly what the questions were or any other part of the process. And if you're done your embassy interview already, tell me in the comments, how was your experience? Was it as quick as mine, or did it take a lot longer? Did you have any questions that you were not prepared for? Let me know.